All right, going from one good guest to another great guest. There we are. We're joined with the man himself, Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Richard Wolff is a professor of economics emeritus of Manchester, Massachusetts, Amherst, and a visiting professor in the graduate program in International Affairs at New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work, host of their nationally syndicated show, Economics Update. His latest book, The System is the Sickness. Actually, I will ask you if this is your latest book, because you may have another book out. You're a prolific writer, but I'll just read it anyway. The System is the Sickness When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism and Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. Professor, how are you doing this morning? You doing okay?
Pretty well, Jamal. I'm glad to be here, and I'm following, as Americans are, the endless saga of Jeffrey Epstein.
Are you? Are you? I thought for some reason I thought you would be looking at the Financial Times, looking at financial issues.
Well,
I didn't think
I'm
you'd
doing
be
that too, but
in the sewer.
it's just so engrossing as a kind of uh, everyday live soap opera. It's it and for me, it is similar in the economics because it's it's moving the curtain so you can see behind the curtain what is actually gonna who these people are, how they act, the lying, which is at this point on a scale that is really kind of mind bending, even
Yeah.
for those of us that are used to it. I see much the same in the economics. It's just it's in your face with the Epstein story.
Explain what you mean when you say you see it in the face with the economics. What would be, well, Donald Trump screaming that tariffs are somehow great
Yes,
is seems
the,
outrageous.
the notion that the tariffs are this wonderful weapon that is going to dramatically improve it is really it's embarrassing. It's
Well, Professor,
embarrassing
Trump,
because look,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
tariff, tariffs are an old idea. You
Mhm.
know, they've been put on by one country or another for hundreds of years. There's nothing new or dramatic about a tariff. And over that period of time, countless books and articles have been written. More of them have been read by me than I wished I had spent time doing, but I had to teach these courses in the university. I had to make commentary about it. So here's what the literature shows you. And I'm talking about an enormous literature. If you walked into a major university library and you said to the librarian, I want to learn about tariffs, where do I go? They would send you to the 15th floor and you'd say, well, what part of it? And they would say, all of it. There's so much. But here's what that literature shows that sometimes tariffs get you what you want, and sometimes tariffs don't get you what you want, and sometimes get tariffs get you the opposite of what you want. So the one thing you can be sure about is that tariffs are not some magic guaranteed way to get you out of a bad economic situation. And we are in a very bad economic situation, which the people who run this country dare not admit. There you go again, like the Epstein story, right? There's obviously stinking mess over there, and we're supposed to pretend, oh, there's no stinking mess over there. We all know there's a stinking mess. We don't know the details of the stinking mess, but we know enough. Well, the same thing with tariffs. So the president the tariffs will do this. He can't know that. Nobody can know that. Tariffs are like a Hail Mary pass in football. It's when you know this game is about to be lost. So we got very little to lose. So let's heave the ball down the field and hope one of the people on our team comes down with it rather than a person on the other team. That's what a Hail Mary pass is in football. Tariffs are a sign that our economy is in trouble. I mean, let's be clear. The President of the United States stands up and slaps in the face every other country on earth. He says to them, I'm going to screw you. We got problems. I'm going to help us, and I'm going to do it at your expense. And I don't care who you are, what you say, what you want. I'm just going to punch you right in the nose. And the people come back and say, you can't do that. You can't have a world in which one of the people in it stands up and punches everybody in the nose. That doesn't make for a good game.
We're America.
And not only that, but you know what's going to happen. If you do that, all of those people, they're going to be angry. They're going to try to, weave and bob and get out of the way of your fist and cut a deal and sell out. But over time, they're building up anger, resentment, rage. And you don't want that at a time when your empire is shrinking. That's the truth of America. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We're losing the war in Ukraine. Come on. Your previous guest told us again in another way who's winning and who's losing there, right? So the empire is just shrinking, and you're making an enemy out of every country in the world. That's your strategy? Holy mackerel. That's crazy. So I'm here having to say this obvious stuff in the same way that I'm saying there's a stinky mess over there with Mr. Epstein, and what are we all dancing around pretending that it may not be quite so stinky? I mean, what?
Yeah.
It tells you that, I don't want to be a prognosticator of doom. On the other hand, you got to call it like it is. Otherwise, what do you need me for? My job is to say, hey, look at this. Look at this. You can't do this. There's a deal that was made. I don't know if you were intending to ask it, but yesterday, desperate to have a good headline that doesn't make it look horrible, Mr. Trump stood up there and said, I cut a deal with Japan.
Yes.
They're going to pay 19% tariff.
And Indonesia, by the way.
Yes, and Indonesia too. By the way, Indonesia 2 months ago joined the BRICS.
Which is exactly why I wanted to talk about it.
Yes, I mean,
because it seems like it's indeed. Oh, go ahead.
Here's the point. The BRICS is the alternative. The BRICS is where everyone is going to get out from under the United States. Because the United States is acting like a global economic bully.
Yes.
It's as simple as that. Every country has now got an incentive to join the BRICS, to make a nice deal with Russia or China or all the other places to go if you don't want to do business with the United States. And that's what's going on. And I got to tell people, Mr. Trump is giving a gift to every leader of every country. There are about 180 countries in the world if you look at the UN membership, okay? Every one of those leaders, good leaders, bad leaders, and everything in between, they now have a new argument to deal with their own people in their own country about their economic difficulties. Every country has economic difficulties. We're not the only one. China has its difficulties. Russia has its difficulties. But what every leader can now do is blame the United States, because they'll be a part of the truth that these tariffs make it more difficult for the economy in Russia or Spain or Guatemala or any other country you pick, which gives every leader the opportunity to blame the U.S. If you think that that's not going to cost us, then you don't understand how the world works.
I accept that, but in the short term, it does seem like either Japan or, for that matter, Indonesia. Like I don't know how it's going to work where Indonesia is trying to serve two masters, or in one case, they're going to allow products that, all things being equal, they shouldn't allow into their country. I mean, because that's what he's trying to get with Canada. That's what he's trying to get with Europe. The United States produces very bad food. And in producing very bad food, we die 5 years younger, not to mention the healthcare issue. Okay,
Right.
so Europe, whose food is better,
Right.
I mean, we have more options, but their food tends to be healthier because their country doesn't allow certain things in their food choices. Where Trump is like, they're not taking our big, beautiful cows and our big, beautiful pigs. And they're not accepting our big, beautiful animals. And it's like, because you put so much nonsense in those things.
Yes.
So, but that's not the way he's making the argument. The point I'm making is, if indeed he's able to knuckle Japan, where Japan is now accepting something that they wouldn't typically accept, or Indonesia, where they wouldn't typically accept certain American products, but they're going to accept these American products, it seems to be working. That level of bullying. No, you can't bully China. No, you can't bully Russia. But Indonesia, who's joined BRICS, it's like the largest Muslim country in the world. I mean, a huge country, and yet accepted this.
Let me answer. First of all, you're absolutely right. Indonesia is a very important country, about 280 million people, which means it's only slightly smaller than the United States. It's a huge and a very important country, part of the Muslim world, absolutely, but also part of the Asian economic totality. Very, very important country. Now, let me explain to you why it won't work even in the short run, right? And this is true for other countries too. What the Indonesians did is say, okay, if you're going to bully us, and if you're going to give us a better deal by our letting your stuff come in, we will let your stuff come in. Meanwhile, every Indonesian producer, every Indonesian company that brings in, say, food from somewhere else in Asia, is now going to adjust its packaging. Just to give you one example, here's how the packaging is going to go tomorrow. On the cover, it's going to say, here is rice, or here are canned vegetables, or here is meat that comes from safe, careful production here in Indonesia. And right next to it on the shelf is American excrement. And every Indonesian is going to understand exactly. And so the American stuff can come in, it'll sit on the shelf, it'll gather rust and dust until a new administration comes in and Indonesian politicians can renegotiate the deal. Mr. Trump can make a big to-do. The local government can say, we fooled them. Everybody can say something, nothing changes. And that's only the first one. I'm not going to give you the second one. When it comes to, you have to pay a tariff if you come from Indonesia. Let's say Indonesia, I'll just pick something, makes furniture. All right? Because they have a lot of wood there, blah, blah, blah. They make furniture. Okay, so if the furniture comes from Indonesia, it has to pay a 19% tariff. Now the Indonesian furniture company looks around and says, who's got the lowest tariff from the United States? Let's pick it. I'll pick one. This is not true. I'm just making up an example. Let's say it's Panama. And so the people in Indonesia say, hey, we send our furniture normally on a big freighter, goes through the Panama Canal, ends up in Los Angeles, where they unload the furniture, blah, blah, blah. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to rent a warehouse in Panama. By the way, lots of warehouses in Panama to do what I'm describing. And the furniture will be offloaded from the freighter in Panama, put into the warehouse. There will be Jose, a Panamanian worker, and he will take a brush and he'll put a little bit of yellow paint on the brush and he'll go on the side of the chair. Now it will be a piece of furniture, a chair, manufactured in Panama, where it pays a 10% tariff instead of from Indonesia. This is done all the time. This is how companies have evaded tariffs for generations. They've already done this before. They're going to do it again. All that Mr. Trump is doing is playing a game designed to make him look big and powerful and tough and putting number one, America number one. Oh boy, this is you know what this is? This is a cheap movie. And you ought to remember, if you're an American, you're in a cheap movie, Jack. You're not out in the real world. You're in a dusty, under air conditioned theater looking at a cheap movie.
So this is not going to have, so there's not a contradiction between, let's say, BRICS and whatever deal the U.S. makes with these countries.
Joining the BRICS is a commitment by Indonesia to be part of another global bloc. They are doing, by the way, what many other countries are now considering. They're considering whether to do that as well, because it's becoming clearer and clearer. You're going to have to choose. The United States, look at the choice for Indonesia. The BRICS say, join us, and you can become part of this enormous trading bloc that has more than half the people of this planet in it, or you can line up with the United States, who's punching you in the nose. This is not a difficult choice. Of course they're going to join BRICS. They're big and powerful enough to know that the United States dare not do much to them beyond what it's already doing. So what you're watching is, you're watching the teams change. You're watching every country say, we used to be dependent on the United States. If we needed money, we would send a mission to New York or Washington to negotiate a deal of stuff. Now they still send missions to New York and Washington, but those people don't go back to the country they come from when they're done. They take an airplane and they go right to Beijing or New Delhi or Sao Paulo in Brazil, and they make the same pitch. And they basically say, who's going to give me the better deal?
Right.
And you know what? It's the Chinese and the BRICS that keep giving them the better deal. That's why they're going there. They're not going there out of ideology. The BRICS is not a socialist bloc. It's not none of that. It is a bloc of people who see that to defend themselves against the United States, they have to do that. And they made the decision, before Trump hit them with tariffs.
Right.
You know what he's doing? He's just making them realize, whoa, good we did that. That's why it can't work. When it pinches too hard, if they really couldn't have one of the escapes I just went through with you, then they would cut off from the United States. They'll just move. They'll stop. They got the rest of the world. The United States once was the huge dominating influence. At that point, in the 1960s or the 1980s, to turn away from the United States would have been a very risky proposition. And the only people who did it were the Chinese, because the Americans refused to deal with them. Until the 1970s, the United States didn't recognize China. There was no ambassador. They weren't allowed to be. So they didn't even do it by choice. They did it by necessity. But for the rest of the world, they chose to go where they felt their economic well-being depended, and that was the United States. And that's not true anymore. And then when you add Mr. Trump's tariff bullying, well, then it's only a question of how soon can we get out of here? How do we arrange it? And how do we do it with minimal damage? That's what's being discussed in every world capital.
This is somewhat of an expansive question, but you're a learned man. And I, as I told you on more than one occasion, you've affected my workable point of view. So I think you're up for the challenge of it. What has happened? I don't get the sense that this is the way the U.S. worked before. I mean, if you think about it, like, for example, the U.S. is now, China has, 8 out of the 10 best universities in the world. Many of the students who are some of the most technically proficient are Chinese. And the U.S. is effectively saying, we don't want you in our country. So we're kicking you out of our country. We are doing an intentional brain drain. Then the tariff thing is creating a context of, okay, the US, who believed in capitalism, believed it up until the point where capitalism wasn't necessarily doing us any favors because a communist country seemed to be doing it better, at the very least using the resources of capitalism to build bridges and roads and buildings and bases on the moon and going into deep space. And these are things that in the 70s and 80s, or let's say in the 70s and 60s, you would say, that's what the US does. We don't do those things. Like, we can't even build high-speed rail. California's been trying to build a high-speed rail line for the last 16 years. China's been putting them up like hotcakes. Like, what has happened? Is it lack of investment in education? Have we just decided we don't care about these things? Like, we don't care about childcare. We don't care about the fact that we're dying 5 years younger than Europe. We don't care about the inability to create infrastructure. What am I missing? Because that wasn't the way this country seemed to have operated. We were the shining city on the hill in the way that Ronald Reagan projected, because we did build those things. We did send stuff into space. We did, the internet, all of these technical achievements. What happened? Something happened. Clearly, something happened.
Oh, listen, Jamal, you're right. And I admire it because you're doing it with a kind of poetry. You're like a poet would ask, what the hell happened? And by asking that question, it's very important. You're getting right to the core. So I'm going to give you my answer, but I'm going to tell you first that I've been given this answer for at least the last 4 or 5 years. And I can tell you, I'm an American. I was like you. I'm born here. I've worked here all my life. This is my country. I'm not going anywhere. So I say this with genuine sadness, but I got to tell you, otherwise I'm not true to myself. We are experiencing what other societies have experienced, and it's called the decline of the empire. There is no other way for me to make sense of this. It isn't bad people. None of that. Because the minute you say, well, the bad president, yeah, but then you have to ask the obvious question. If it's a bad president, how come we put him in that position? How was it possible that we're sitting here, wondering about what Mr. Epstein did on his stinking island? Come on. What a statement about us as a culture. Whoa. But I'm serious. We had a tremendous run. When you talk about those periods of American history, and you're right, in the past, when we built, when we were the shining hill, when we were the advanced march into space, or whatever you look at, it was kind of amazing what this little country, remember, we are 4.5% of the world population. We're a tiny part of this planet. And look what we accomplished. Well, I agree. I grew up in that. I'm older than you. I've been around through that wonderful ride up. But I got to tell you, like every other empire, the ride up is followed by a peak. And then you get the ride down. And the ride down is not fun. Never was. You want to see an example of how grim it is? Go to England. You travel across England, you will see, lots of welfare in London, lots of fancy restaurants, all of that. But the minute you go out into the countryside of England, you see poverty. You see the collapse of what once was England to what it is now. You know what they are? They're our future. They are the sign of a system, an earlier empire that has been going down a longer time. We're early in the process, but if we're not careful, we're going down. There are huge factories in England that are sitting there empty. Well, I know New England. New England is a place where there are huge factories sitting empty, and they have for many years. They once were thriving production. Now they are places for yoga studios, and I'm not against yoga studios, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
We're making do with something that is is no longer relevant to us. We have got to understand that, or else we're hopeless. We're not going to solve anything if we can't. Let me use a metaphor. If you're familiar at all with Alcoholics Anonymous, one of the rules when you go into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and you stand up and you speak, you have to begin by saying, I'm an alcoholic. That's why I'm here. In other words, you're recognizing that you and the other people in the room share a common problem. And now you're going to talk about how you're going to solve it. By the way, it's been the most successful program to deal with alcoholism that we
Yeah.
have. And all I'm saying is you've got to begin by recognizing capitalism works that way. It goes to a place, it's very successful for a while. Look, again, I'm going to use New England. That's where capitalism in America began. It used to be where all those factories were built, where all the wealth was created. And then capitalism moved. That's why all those factories are empty. They went to the Midwest. What do we call the Midwest now? The Rust Belt, because capitalism left there and went to the South or went to the West. And I got to tell you, then capitalism moved again out of the country. It went to Mexico, went to Canada, it went around the world to China. That's how capitalism works. When you're the place where capitalism is growing, you say, rah, rah, capitalism. I get that. But when capitalism leaves, you can't just sit there scratching your head and say, what happened? Well, what happened is capitalism did its thing. Capitalism goes where the profits are. You and I both know. Why did all those companies go to China? Because it was profitable. Nobody held a gun to their head. No one made them go. The Chinese didn't have the power to do that. General Motors decided it's more profitable to make cars in China than to make them in Detroit. And that's why General Motors sells more cars in China today than it does in the United States. So if you ask General Motors, where are you? What kind of company are you? Are you American? They have to look at you and they have to decide what they dare tell you. But the truth of it is they're already Chinese. That's where their profits are. That's where their future is. Look, I don't want to be the mean guy to tell you what you already know. China is not just a place where you can pay workers way less than what you pay them here. China is also the fastest growing market for what the capitalists produce. That's why they sell more GM cars in China. That's why Tesla has a factory in China, because it wants to sell. The whole world is now buying Chinese cars because they're the cheapest and the best. We can't because we have a tariff. 100% electric cars and trucks from China.
BYD.
Yeah. Three weeks ago, I was in Paris, France, and I hailed a cab to get from one place to another. And the cab pulls up, and there I see, I've never been that close to one before, BYD, that's the cab.
Really?
Yeah, so I get into the cab, and I speak French. My family is partly French, so I know how to speak French. I have since I've been a kid, so I can talk to the cabbie, and I say to him, "Oh," he says, "we buy the BYD because it's cheaper and it lasts longer and it can handle the Paris traffic." Yeah, I had already heard that, but here was a very practical guy telling me, got nothing. He didn't want to buy. He was a big French patriot. He didn't want to buy Chinese. He wanted to buy a Peugeot, one of the bigger French car companies. But he said, I can't do that. My living depends on that. And the car from China is better, easier to fix, and lasts longer. I just, that's it. He says, look around. And I saw many of the cabs were BYD company cars. And I have to come back and tell stories like this to you because we in America ride in one. We can't even see one.
I know. I know. I know.
But it's pathetic when you think about it, Jamal. Let me make a point about that. Every American company that produces goods and services, probably, or most of them, have a competitor or more than one in other parts of the world. So if I'm making, I don't know, pens, by making pens like this one here in the United States. Well, there are companies in France or in Nigeria who making pens. The difference is we all of us pen companies, competitors, we have to buy cars and trucks as part of our inputs. Trucks to bring the inputs, trucks to take the finished pens and to the warehouse, and we all buy trucks. And we all want to buy electric trucks because they are cheaper to run and cheaper to fix. And we all want to buy the best, cheapest truck, which is a BYD truck. All the competitors around the world are busy buying BYD trucks. Americans can't do it. American companies who would otherwise be competitive with the foreigners we compete with, we can't win that competition because we're forced to spend more on less good electric vehicles made by Ford or GM or Tesla or Toyota because we are denied. All of this is done in the name of protecting the jobs of American auto workers, which it does. But what you have, if you're honest, it's doing that at the price of lots of other people's jobs, which are going to disappear because their employer can't win the competition, being blocked from getting the cheapest, best input. This is shooting yourself in the foot. And you know what? It hurts.
Wow. Professor, fantastic answer. I appreciate that. Real quick, 30 seconds. That's not a policy issue. Like the decline thing, that's not a policy issue. If they took better policy, they would have been able to propagate the system longer. They would have less. I mean, they're passing a bill where they're taking $1 trillion out of Medicaid in order to give themselves tax cuts. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. Like, they don't care.
It's beyond that they don't care. It's a blindness. You could look at the decline of the empire as a very serious problem. And what you would have to then do is you'd have to sit down with the Chinese above all, and you'd have to work out a live and let live plan. You have to do that because you're losing. You're not winning. And there's no prospect other than some miracle that I can't even imagine about that changing anytime soon. The United States has been trying to hold back China for 20 years. It doesn't work. So sit down and work out a deal. Stop coming up with one way to attack the Chinese, or you drive their students out of Harvard, or make it impossible to sell their solar panels here in America. Stop. This is a program of aggressive hostility, and you're not going to win that. Or to say the same thing another way, the only thing left you have is a nuclear weapon. And let me tell you, Jack, then it's over anyway, because they got those too. Yeah. So sit down and work a deal. That is the policy that this analysis suggests they ought to follow.
Professor Richard Wolff, thank you for this. Always appreciate you joining me for the show. Professor Richard Wolff is Professor of Economics Emeritus, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and visiting professor at the graduate program in International Affairs and the New School University in New York City. He's founder of Democracy at Work and hosts their nationally syndicated show, Economic Update. That is a fantastic show, by the way. His latest book is System is the Sickness, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, and it is available with his other books, Understanding Socialism, Understanding Marxism, at www.democracyatwork.info. And of course, they can follow you on Twitter at Prof, Prof, WOLFF. Where else can people find you, by the way? Beyond, did I name all the places?
Just about. Democracy at Work is our organization. Democracy at Work, we have a Substack program where you can find us. We're all over the YouTube. We have a website, democracyatwork.info, and that'll take you to all the work we do. But,
excellent.
But Jamal, you're a modest person, so let me take this moment to thank you on behalf of your guests and on behalf of your audience. Very important, more so than at any time in American history, to have these conversations, to draw these issues out, to allow things to be said that people can chew on and think about, because that's the only hope we have to get out of the mess we're in.
From your, thank you for that. You
My
be safe, all right? You have a good day.